Hey guys, hope all is well. Happy Wednesday. Congratulations, you just got through the middle of the week. It's always very difficult to get through Wednesday, but then Thursday and Friday's on the other side, and well, then's the weekend. So, in this video, I wanted to continue the series I'd started called Chess Secrets You Wish You Knew. And the first two videos, I had a discussion about weaknesses, and I had a discussion about a particular maneuver, rook e8 and bishop f8. And in this video, I want to get at uh, basically what you do when you have a space disadvantage, how you play when you lack a space disadvantage. And there's certain openings where that is the case, just sort of right off the bat. Particularly lines of the French where you take on e4, and even some lines of the Caro-Kann where that's the case. And as the black player, dealing with space is something you have to be able to. Dealing without space is something that you have to be able to manage at a high level, because otherwise you're in trouble. So I just want to sort of give you my overall premise first, and then we can look at some examples and see where we stand. So the rule is, in my opinion, that when you're lacking space, you try to trade a few minor pieces to relieve congestion, and also ensure that you're not extremely susceptible to a big attack. And I think that's going to be bore out in the examples pretty well. So the first game I'm going to show you is actually not the game that's in front of you, but a game with Hoi Fan and Timur Gareev. And let me switch that game over really quickly. So I'm going to do that. Okay. And look at how this transpires. So e4, e6, d4, d5, knight c3, d takes e4, knight takes e4. And this is sort of the French Rubinstein, which I was talking about, where you take on e4 very quickly, and white pretty much has a clear-cut space advantage, right? White has more space in the middle, a knight in the center, and black has to deal with this appropriately. And I just want you to see what happens. Bishop d7, that's actually the Fort Knox variation of the French. Knight f3, bishop c6, bishop d3, and you see white is getting very rapid development, and black really needs to sort of mitigate against that, and I just wanted you to see how it goes. Knight d7, castles, knight gf6, knight g3, white sort of refusing to trade pieces, trying to have white's pieces point towards black's king side. Bishop e7, c4, takes, c5, bishop e3, castles, and yeah, this is a good place to stop. In this position, white has a pretty clear space advantage. White also has the two bishops, which I talk about a lot of the times constituting an advantage. But it's very interesting and instructive to see in the next 7 or 8 moves how Timur Gareev essentially sort of negates that white advantage, and it's very instructive. First, after Hoi Fan plays rook f d1, Gareev takes on d4. Very important move. Clearing up some of the congestion in the middle of the board, and then forcing bishop takes d4. And now queen c7, very important, grabbing some squares e5 and c5, and also thinking about connecting the rooks and exchanging these another pair of minor pieces. Already you can see black decided to give up the bishop for the knight to sort of relieve some of that congestion. And then the few moves he does more of that by playing, after rook a c1, rook a d8, bishop b1, a5, h3, bishop c5. And here is really the instructive point, this bishop c5 move, because now what black is saying, I'm going to trade yet another pair of minor pieces, ease the congestion, the pressure of these bishops pointing at my king side. And after being able to do that, black is able to equalize and really have good chances to fight in the rest of the game. And there's no way to really get rid of this bishop without to avoid the trade of bishops without going for repetition. So at bishop c3, bishop b4, like Gareev said, and white can take a repetition here, but I don't think that's is what Huifan wanted to do, and as a consequence, played b3, bishop takes, rook take, queen takes, knight c5, and already it's black that's totally fine. But the reason that black is fine is because of the trade of a few pairs of minor pieces to relieve the congestion and overall pressure pointing at black's king side. Note that black also managed to do this by and not compromise his own pawn structure. So the pawn structure is pretty good. Black has a pawn minority on the queen side, but has good control of the dark squares and sort of mitigated against white's space. So this is the thing. If you're able to trade a few minor pieces and sort of not compromise the rest of your position, you're usually okay, and you're able to sort of play the game freely. Let's look at another example of that. This is a game, Vasily Ivanchuk against Vichy. Oh no, that's not the game I want. That's the game I want to save for last. So excuse me, I'm going to switch games and go to another example of that. Ivan Popov versus Alexei, and don't ask me to pronounce that name. And let's see what happens in that game. E4, E6, another French, just to give this example. D4, D5, knight C3, takes. And if we just look at these moves, this is all Fort Knox stuff. And again, the white players refusing to make an exchange, refusing to play knight takes F6. I will say that knight takes F6 is a reasonable move, and white does maintain a slight advantage after knight takes F6. It's not much, but white is still a little bit better. But black has the option of playing queen takes F6, which is pretty decent. And the point being that bishop G5 doesn't actually trap the queen because there's this bishop takes F3 resource, which ultimately wins a piece for black because the G5 bishop would be hanging and the D1 queen is hanging. So, okay, we see this knight G3 move again. I would say, honestly, better is queen E2, but that's, again, another story. Knight G3 played, G6, bishop, rook E1, bishop G7, C4, castles. And this is another position where white has the space advantage, and all the minor pieces are on the board. And if black could trade one pair of minor pieces, sometimes two, it really eases the congestion and allows black to really play without any big problems. Now here, black is actually pretty okay, and it's a combination of other factors. Namely, the bishop on D3 here is really biting on granite against the triangle of fianchetto pawns, H6, G6, F7, and a bishop biting. Bishops really don't do great if they're opposing fianchetto diagonals. Maybe I should do a video on that. That's another story. And essentially here, white makes a huge mistake playing knight e5. And it's instructive because it plays into the hands of black. Because after this trade, knight takes e5, d takes e5, knight d7 is played, and the position is completely transformed. What you have now is a situation where one pair of minor pieces have been exchanged, so there's really less of an attack, not there was a major attack before, but there's less pressure on black's king side. And conversely, white also, by taking with the d pawn, is a little bit overextended. And so the e5 pawn becomes weak. F4 is played to defend that pawn. This bishop on c6 has a lovely diagonal. And after knight c5, threatening a further trade of pieces, bishop c2, queen takes d1, rook takes d1, rook f d8, bishop e3, bishop f8, b4, and then this very strong move, bishop a4. Black is actually better because black was able to trade a pair of minor pieces. Now actually trade another pair after bishop takes and knight takes. And white pushed these pawns and does have a space advantage, but there's no attack to speak of. And now these pawn pushes have become weaknesses, like we talked about in a previous video. Again, you can see that in some positions, black's task is eased significantly by the trade of a few minor pieces. And then you can see that white can become really overextended if the space advantage was really sort of a bit too overeager. Let's look at another example and let's look at another example to reinforce this sort of premise that I'm trying to work us with. So yeah, let me see. Yeah, this is actually another example. And it's actually from d4 opening, because it's not just e4 openings where this is the case. It's, again, I repeat, it's not just e4 openings where this is the case. This happens in all sorts of openings where black is actually aiming and usually it's solid structures, where black is aiming to trade a pair of minor pieces, not compromise the structural integrity of the position, and then just play. Sometimes it leads to quick draws, but that's really at the highest level. So anyways, d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, b6. This is the Queen's Indian, a very, very solid opening, and I think we're going to see why in a little bit. g3, bishop b7, bishop g2, bishop e7. Again, I'm breezing through this because this isn't really the point, is to learn the openings here. After castles, knight c3, knight e4. And this is another line where black is actually willingly trying to exchange a pair of minor pieces to relieve the congestion in the middle of the board and the space advantage that white has. It's clear in this position that white does have a bit more space, right? The pawns of whites are a little bit more extended, and as a consequence, it's really important for black not to just get rolled over. And so this is actually an old main line of the Queen's Indian. After knight takes e4, bishop takes e4. I've never been a fan of actually white taking on e4 in this system, because in this sort of fashion, because essentially you're giving black what he wants. You're allowing a trade of minor pieces, and additionally you're allowing this bishop to stay on the e4 square, where he'll eventually be able to trade another pair of minor pieces, probably the light squared bishops, or maybe just keep the bishop on e4 and keep the structure pretty solid. And as a consequence, it's very difficult for white to get anything going on the king side with any sort of crazy initiative. And so here, Karpov's opponent was really, really significantly outrated and was happy with the draw. But the point is, after knight e1, bishop takes, king takes, knight takes, and d5, black really has no problems to speak of. Black managed to trade a pair of minor pieces. The structural integrity of black's system is also preserved. There aren't any major weaknesses. You might argue that b6 is a micro weakness, because the light squares on the queen side are a little bit weak as a consequence of the light squared bishop being traded off the board. But it's really hard to take advantage of that. And after queen a4, d takes, queen takes, c5, black manages to trade a few more pawns and develop, and rook to fd1. After rook to fd1 was played here, white actually offered a draw, and the reason for that is that black can just play queen e7 in this position, and black's rooks are connected, and there's, again, no problems to speak of, because a few minor pieces were exchanged and they relieved the congestion in the middle of the board. Let us look at yet another example, and then before we go to the how you shouldn't play. This is another Caro-Kann. Well, not another Caro-Kann. This is the first Caro-Kann. We looked at French's before. And I think the reason I almost slipped when I said another Caro-Kann is because the structure is similar in that white has a space advantage and black sort of mitigating against that. And you can see here, Polgar playing Anand. Polgar's a very aggressive player, and Anand really extinguished her initiative quite quickly. e4, c6, d4, d5, knight c3, a trade on e4, and then knight d7. This is the Karpov variation, if you're curious out there. Very solid line, one that's was played by Karpov throughout his championship reign, and is really a system that suited him. So bishop d3, knight gf6, and many people are looking at playing knight g5 these days. It's more critical. The point being that, for you guys out there, that if h6, there's knight e6. A very sly and tricky move, because after f takes e6, there's bishop g6 mate. So maybe you're going knight g5 these days, but knight f3, and now this allows a trade of minor pieces. So you have knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, and knight f6. And already in these types of positions, white's a touch better just because of the space, but black is okay, because now black develops with tempo, hitting the bishop on e4, forcing it back to d3. And after bishop g4, again, black has no bad pieces, managed to trade a pair of minor pieces, and has a structure that isn't compromised. It's really solid. And so if you don't have any bad pieces, you manage to relieve some of that congestion, things are okay. And already here, black is absolutely fine. There's nothing bad to speak of. And as a consequence, sometimes what happens is the white player is a little bit frustrated and decides to play a little bit in vain, trying to get some sort of attack going. And here that definitely happened because Judith Polgar eventually castled queenside and tried to get something going, but it's just not there. And I'll just play over a few moves here, not without explanation really. But the point is, this queen c2 move is really, really aggressive and not very good. And after bishop takes f3, g takes f3, and queen h5, you can see white's structure is spoiled. The queen is doing a decent job sort of staying near the black king just to make sure that there's no attack coming really quickly. And after castles and knight d5, it's almost like black is going to thinking about putting a piece on f4, maybe taking on e3. And the main point is that black has managed to trade two pairs of minor pieces and sort of mitigate against the white pressure. You can imagine if there are two more pairs of minor pieces on the board pointing at white's king, that would be a problem. Here, not so much. And it was really executed beautifully by Anand here, because after king b1, he quickly seized the initiative with b5 and ultimately went on to win a very nice attacking game. I'm just going to show one more move here just because I think it's important, because you might have been wondering why, instead of king b1, rook dg1, putting pressure on the open g file, and maybe thinking about rook g5. And the point is this very calm, cool, and connected move, f6, which just cuts out really any sort of counterplay on g5, any sort of attack. And black is just really solid here. And the queen's protecting h7, and there's really nothing to speak of. And black's going to eventually open the b file on the queen side with decisive effect. But really, again, another emphasis of this idea of trading a few minor pieces to get something to relieve the congestion. Now, the last example I'm going to show you is from a game that the player with space actually won, because I think it's important to actually see what that looks like to understand what you shouldn't be doing, because it is easy to sort of see, oh, okay, these pieces have been traded and then black's fine, and yeah, it's not always so simple. So this is how it goes horribly wrong. So this is a Caro-Kann, e4, c6, d4, d5, knight d2, takes, knight d7, Karpov variation again. Bishop c4 this time. That was different than bishop d3, and again, pretty much eyeing the f7 square right away. And so sort of clean, already Ivanchuk is staking out the aggressive intentions, and Anand had to be a bit careful. Knight gf6, and then no, knight g5, not trading the minor pieces. e6, queen e2, and you can see this massive pressure on f7 and e6 here. Knight takes f7 is a threat, so black played knight b6, bishop b3, h6. And again, note here the knight does not go back to e4 where he's trading a pair of minor pieces, but instead goes knight 5 f3, keeping the minor pieces on the board. This is a nuance that is different than the previous examples that we looked at. So c5, bishop f4, knight bd5, bishop e5. I really love this move. The bishop eyeing the diagonal, that the a1 h8 diagonal, and really again avoiding a trade of minor pieces and just getting all the pieces in aggressive posts. Queen a5, knight d2, c takes. Again, I really like this move here as well. Knight gf3. The point is not to waste its tempo taking with the bishop, and then maybe, because if you took with the bishop here, maybe black would play bishop c5 and actually successfully trade a pair of minor pieces. So instead, playing knight gf3 doesn't allow for trading the pair of bishops, and also just keeps more tension. Bishop e7, knight takes d4 now, castles, and this has ultimately been a really big failure for blacks as far as the opening is concerned, because white has a clear space advantage based on having more pieces in the middle, a little bit more development, but also all four minor pieces are still on the board. And so it's not a surprise here that black's actually winds up struggling. And so bishop d7 was played, c3, and let's just look at a few more moves. And again, bishop c2 going towards the king side. Again, these bishops are like lasers pointing at the black king side, and nothing has been traded thus far. It marks a really big failure of black's setup. Knight f3. Note that queen takes b2 is impossible because of bishop h7 check here. I'll just point that out. Takes, check, bye-bye queen. Rook f d8 was played. Again, maybe bishop d6 should have been played. Something needed to be traded here. I just cannot stress it enough. Something had to be exchanged. Rook f d8, rook d1, bishop f8. Another move that I think is a pretty big mistake. There's a bishop. Okay, it's at this defensive post we talked about on bishop f8. But here there's no counterplay to speak of on the e line. So there's no rook e8, bishop f8 here because the rook is not playing on the e line. And rook e1, bishop e8. Again, a useful move, I guess, sort of clearing the way for the rook, but it's just a little bit too passive. Bishop b3, a5, a3, a4, bishop a2, bishop d7, h3, knight e7, bishop b1, knight e8, and then bishop g3. And the transformation is nearly complete here because now Ivanchuk's going to put the knight on e5. And after knight f6, knight e5, you can see here that the shuffling that Anand has been sort of engaged in the past 10 to 15 moves has been really aimless because none of the minor pieces have been traded. White's been able to sort of rally all his forces together, and nasty things happen, bad things happen when it goes like this. And it's not a surprise that White went on to win this game. So, just to sort of recap the ideas in this video, just so you get a sense of what we're talking about here. When you're lacking space as the black player, and I want to say as the black player because hopefully as white you don't have a major space disadvantage. You ought to trade a pair of minor pieces, and sometimes it sort of mitigates against that sort of space disadvantage. It does it for two things. One, it just gives white less stuff to throw at you, and two, it means that you're less likely to get checkmated, I would say. And additionally, another caveat to that is if there's less stuff that your opponent has, they're controlling less squares, so that's something to also think about. And finally, the last thing connected to this idea of trading a pair of minor pieces, or sometimes two, is that you're not trading minor pieces with the intention to draw the game. Many instances you're arguing that I have better chances of winning the game with some of these minor pieces off the board. So essentially what you're doing is you're saying that your long-term structural integrity that was sort of established by not having a space advantage, but also by being modest in the way you set up your pawns, means that they're flexible later in the game. A lot of times when white has a space advantage, later in the game, if that center has not been realized in any sort of meaningful way, those pawns can become targets, and the structure is less flexible because the pawns are pushed further up the board. So if you look at it from that perspective, you're not necessarily trying to draw the game by trading a few minor pieces. You're giving yourself better chances to actually get the result that you actually want, which is a win, because that's where your advantage lies, in your structural integrity. Because you can see in all these examples we looked at, whether it be this Caro-Kann example where it didn't work out, or those other French examples, black's pawn structure was solid. That wasn't the issue. It was the pieces or the lack of space. So that's it for this sort of primer on space disadvantage and trading a pair of minor pieces. And hopefully you can implement that in your own games and be cognizant of why sometimes you might slip into trouble. And it's because aimless maneuvering like this with all the minor pieces on the board spells disaster when you're the one that lacks the space. All right, that is it for me, and I'll be back with more content like this soon, and thanks for watching.